afternoon for those of you in the Americas, good evening for those of you in Europe and farther away. And this is the Wizards of Ox Live. And we are here with my beautiful co-wizards, Monique, Karla, and Patricia. And today we're gonna do something that I think you're gonna find useful, which is how to start this diet, what to eat, how do I play with my menus, can I eat something more than ice cubes? You know, all those things we're going to be able to take a look at, and so that you can have more food choices, easy to choose food choices, so that you can assure that lowering slowly towards your low oxalate target. And I think it's going to be really good. I think it's going to be very, very clear, and I hope you're going to find it useful. We're going to have the chat open, and even if you're looking at the recording, if you write on the comments any questions and comments that you might have, we'll be checking on, on those comments to see, to just further the conversation. On the other hand, you have to remember that this is a testimonial page. This is something that we're doing really to share this very healing diet that we believed in, that we've seen results in. But we are counting on the fact that you're being followed by a medical professional, and that what we are saying does not constitute medical advice. So far from the little disclaimer that we have to do, but be welcome, and let's just get started.
So what we want to do today, folks, is actually talk about a real live example. So we realize that we've talked in general lots of times about reducing oxalate slowly, but of course that leaves all the calculating to you. And so what we're trying to do now is give you a simple way to handle even coming from a very high level of oxalate intake and how to start moving down. So we really want you to think in terms of kind of a plug and play approach, and maybe really simplifying your diet as a way to give yourself a starting place. And so we're going to talk about the idea of having a certain amount of oxalate in a main dish on your plate, with a certain amount of oxalate in like a vegetable or a grain or a fruit, and how to kind of construct a plate, at least for like your basic omnivore, and really how to think about taking oxalate down without necessarily having to do all the math. We realized that in hindsight, we all kind of did that. We all kind of simplified this thing, put a few stakes in the ground and then started to move blocks instead of having to count and measure everything. So I think this is a nice pragmatic approach, and particularly for people who are starting from a heavily plant-based or a very structured keto, where you may have been taking in a lot of nuts and really high oxalate greens, or even an omnivore where you're trying to optimize your health. And so you're really focusing on those extra good for you plants, which all turn out to be extra oxalate ridden as well. So we're trying to start from a pretty high level. This is not for everybody who's necessarily on this call. You might not be starting from this high level. So the one thing I would say is, if you are just starting, please go and join one of the Trying Low Oxalates groups. Get your hands on the spreadsheet, and even for a few days, kind of peg what your oxalate intake is. Again, not weighing and measuring. If you're eating a handful of nuts, then maybe you need to look up a 1/4 cup or a 1/2 cup. We've got some of those kinds of serving sizes in that spreadsheet, so you don't have to have a huge amount of precision. But let's say you end up with your oxalate intake, maybe it's like 1,200 some days, maybe other days it's more like 1,000. Maybe what you can do instead of having to average is maybe drop to 1,000 and kind of hold there. And that's actually the example we're going to talk through. So I've I've teed up Karla so she can start to go through her example. We will have other materials that may be available. And so we'll let you folks know where you can find it, but let's give Karla the floor here and let her talk through some great options. Oh, and
Give
Patricia.
me a second, Karla. Some of the things that we talked about when we were preparing for this session, it was the fact why we don't give a simplified oxalate list and we give you the huge 3,000 line spreadsheet, okay?
That everybody seems to universally hate, but we love, and so we need to tell you about that. Go ahead, Patricia.
Exactly. I think one of the bases of good quality of life, one of the bases of fun in the kitchen, one of the bases of not feeling deprived and, feeling adventurous and not, sick and ill and having to eat, ice cubes and lettuce is variety. So you want to start or continue variety. You want to test new foods. You want to start expanding your horizons and trying different things. And that is going to give you some really, really good ideas. The other thing that we were talking about, we're going to be talking about spices. We're going to be talking about some of the high foods or some of your previously favorite foods. But we are just going to have to incorporate them, start evolving them into other things that are going to become also, favorites. Another thing that was very helpful to me in particular, and then I'll leave the rest of the time to Karla, was the fact of organizing my week by days and organizing by the week. So we were doing a rotation diet, and that's what helped me with that method that they're going to be explaining to you, because you could just pick your side dishes if you knew what your main dish was going to be and keep that one as a basis. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel every day. So what am I talking about? One day, if you're an omnivore, you can have one day as your base chicken, the next one beef, the next one pork, the next one fish, the next one seafood. And we even added, a Mexican, we added a Mexican food day, and or an international day. We did that as well. And that would give us the possibility, if we knew it was International Day, then I would start looking into, getting some, I don't know, Polish or Korean or whatever recipes, and it would become fun. And also the kids would be involved, and, we would put up, Chinese stocks and whatever, and it would just be fun. And so I think that's a really important part of it. But if you're coming down from a very high level, just remember that some of those low oxalate diets are not for you. You have to go down low and slow. Okay, so now, Karla, it's all yours.
Okay, the other thing that I wanted to point out is when we started the diet, I was already a full-time mom, retired from the military. I had time to play in the kitchen. I love playing in the kitchen. If you are working full-time, you may not want to come home after a full day of working and then spend a couple hours going through cookbooks, figuring out what the heck you're going to eat, and then having to cook it. Or you're not feeling very good and you just want something simple that I can make this one baseline recipe or have baseline ingredients and make 2 or 3 meals out of it. So I've got a breakfast, and then maybe I throw in another breakfast, but I have 2 or 3 days of meals that I can prep in advance and then just play around with. So instead of spending hours in the kitchen after I'm spending hours all day at work, you know, I have some meals that I can just, without, you know, pull out the baseline meal, throw in a couple of additions, a little extra fruit, and I'm spending maybe 30 minutes in the kitchen or 15 minutes in the kitchen as opposed to an hour, hour and a half. So a little less fuss. And especially if you're not feeling all that great, you know, the less time that you have to, that you're having to do this, probably the better, until you start working your way down and your body starts adjusting. So that was partially my thought process as well. How do, you know, where do we start? How do I make it easy on myself? How do you make it easy on yourself? So,
Plug and play is really important as far as you can get. And so all of us to one degree or another did plug and play. So if I was having a really bad day, although I was working still part-time, if I had no energy, I knew which things I had on hand that I could put together and make a meal, and that would be it. So if we start to talk in this presentation about like 50 milligram items or 25 milligram items, what we're trying to give you is like these plug and play pieces, right? So that you can say, if I'm making a meal of X amount of oxalate, what am I doing in order to build that? What kind of baseline can I give myself in terms of main course dishes, and then building sides around that to get to, and we're going to say approximately the number you want to get to, because although Karla and I both will have specific numbers for oxalate, there's not been enough testing for us to have really good, reliable averages. That's one of those things that we're probably going to be called to do more of as time goes on. But the truth of the matter is, you're trying to bias your diet in a direction. Precision's not as important as this biasing in a particular direction, because truth be told, before you knew about oxalate, your oxalate was probably doing this from one day to another. And so all we're trying to do is give you some tools so that you can manage the reduction, do it in a way that you're not going to overload your system with too much oxalate dumping all at once. And in a worst case scenario, even if you've dropped down to 1,000 milligrams, but you're still pretty high compared to a low oxalate diet. If you're having a bad day, maybe you add a little bit of oxalate in. That still may be a tool that you want to use. So just keep in mind that this is not something where we can be completely prescriptive. It's not that kind of game. This is still the dance where you have to evaluate how your symptoms are, what your stress level is, what's going on in your life, and then, you know, do this plug and play in whatever way makes the best sense for you.
The art and science of lowering oxalate.
The art and science, exactly. Yeah, it is not one or the other. We're going to have to be doing both. The floor is yours, Karla.
okay.
I think I gave you sharing capacity.
Let's see. Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay, let me get this on a slideshow. Okay, so you're starting. What the heck? My screen froze.
Oh no.
Okay, so my premise is you're roughly at 1,000 milligrams a day, or you're lowering to 1,000 milligrams. So what I came up with was 4 2-serving meals, one that's vegan, one that you can make adjust, and it can be vegan, that are ranging the main meals from 270 to 300 milligrams per serving. Insanely high, but you know, that's when you're at that level, that's what you want to get to. And then have anywhere from, let's say, 85 to 200 milligrams ish for snacks and beverages. Again, your baseline meals are using pretty minimal ingredients. And then you have your plug and play options, which are, your vegetables, your fruits, and then your snacks and beverages. So the baseline breakfast was essentially just a cheese omelet. If you don't like omelet, it can be scrambled eggs, can be, 2 poached eggs, eggs over easy, just, eggs, any way you're good with it. A half cup of cheese, a little bit of chive, pinch of salt, just for a little more flavor. And as you notice, your overall oxalate and milligrams per serving for just that baseline is really low, but eggs are something you can play with. So, you throw in a 1/4 cup of spinach or some olives or your red Swiss or green Swiss chard. For your fruit sides, you can do blackberries, apricots, kiwi. Those are just some of the things that, you can play with. For a beverage, I threw in, a cup of Earl Grey tea. I know a lot of people like to have that, with breakfast. And you can have 1 or 2 slices, if you're not gluten-free, of whole wheat bread. Or look at, a gluten-free option that kind of runs you 20 to 40 milligrams, 1 slice, 2 slices. So if you just do 1 serving of that omelet, throw in some spinach and olives, your blackberries and your tea, you're getting pretty close there to 300 milligrams. Do the red Swiss chard. Same amount of blackberries, but back off the toast. It gets you to 274. You add that other slice of toast, it kind of puts you over the 300. Use the green Swiss chard. Now, let's say you want to do apricots. You can do that with 2 slices of toast. Add your tea, get you at 273. If you want to bump up the apricots, it probably pushes you over the 300. So, but, you could bump up the apricots, back off the toast. Or you can do the omelet with the Swiss chard, the kiwi, the toast, and that puts you pretty close to your 300, and it still gives you some playroom for, some snacks.
For a gluten-free alternative, Karla, a plain Udi's gluten-free bagel comes in at about 30. So might be something that plays very nicely here.
Yes. So,
Nobody
there are
panic. We are talking about somebody who's coming from very high oxalate.
Yes.
And it's coming down gradually. This is not low oxalate eating. We just want to make very clear to everybody that we know that this is not a low oxalate diet.
Yes, this is lowering.
Exactly. The key here is that we are lowering oxalate. So if you're coming from a lot of green smoothies and you're coming in for lots of salads and lots of nuts and things like that, you might want to get started with something like this at this level before you really say you're going low oxalate.
Yep. So I did a baseline lunch, basically a penne marinara, which is penne pasta, marinara sauce, a little bit of Parmesan, and you can do a ground meat. If you would just as soon be, do a vegan or vegetarian, skip the ground meat, your add-ins would be spinach and eggplant. I use the Italian eggplant as opposed to the the regular purple globe eggplant, because that's higher in oxalate, you would have to throw on quite a bit more of regular, the purple globe eggplant to get you up to, 300 milligrams ish per meal. And if you notice here, even with the Italian eggplant, it's still, you don't quite get there, but it does get you close, and you have more play room with, with fruits, vegetables, and snacks. So if you're doing your marinara with spinach and blackberries, you're at 284. Spinach and apricot, 286. Kiwi and guava get you 282 and 84. Now, if you're just doing it with the Italian eggplant, there are your numbers for if you're adding, blackberries, apricot, kiwi, guavas. I didn't throw in like bread or a beverage, but tea will probably bump you up a little bit more than, so you can throw in a beverage of choice. This one is vegan, sorry. Basically a half cup of long grain wild rice, garlic, salt, water, red onion, a little bit of picante sauce. Your add-ins could be black beans, pinto beans, sweet potato, kale. Your fruits, again, blackberries, apricot, kiwi. You can throw in some avocado. The less ripe, the higher the oxalate it will be in general that we found for avocado. So that will help. So your one serving bowl, you see the first one with black beans, kale, sweet potato, blackberries, and then you throw in a lemonade. That gets you right at 300 milligrams. You go with water, and the apricot puts you just below at 297. Kiwi, 299. Again, gets you fairly close to that 300 that you're looking for. If you do kale, sweet potato, blackberries, throw in a little bit of extra picante sauce, and with the lemonade, that'll bump you up to, again, 290. So 91, you have something to play with here. And that's with the pinto beans as opposed to the black beans. And then the last one you see, it's just, kale, sweet potato, pinto beans, throw in, some avocado, then your lemonade. Again, you're at 291, not bad. Another baseline dinner, and this is one that I'm personally familiar with, is just a loaded baked potato. And I know a lot of people that don't do or go beyond the sour cream, the onions, a little bit of bacon, bits of cheese, and throw in, different dips, salsa, beans. So if you notice, just the baked potato with skin and flesh, that's 205 milligrams. So you're over halfway there just with a darn potato. So you can add in some artichoke dip. Or if you want to go with a vegan alternative, do a vegan spinach artichoke dip. And I'll explain a little bit the differences as we get a little bit farther down. Or you can make some black bean salsa. Your fruits would be mandarin oranges and, a pink or a white grapefruit. If you'll notice, a quarter cup of the vegan spinach artichoke dip is actually lower than a regular artichoke dip, because you're only getting 2 tablespoons of it if you're doing the traditional one. That is because with the recipes that I looked at, the regular artichoke dip used frozen spinach, and a quarter cup, would put you well over 300. It was 330, 340. Whereas the vegan one, the recipe that I found, actually used fresh spinach. And that was the reason that it was lower. So you start out with, your baked potato, your traditional spinach artichoke dip, and 3 mandarin oranges. Not quite 300, but get you close. If you do that and add in half of a pink grapefruit, it actually bumps you over your 300, but you still have plenty of wiggle room, because your 3 meals are only getting you to 900. If you do a baked potato with the white grapefruit and the traditional artichoke dip, it's considerably lower than the other two. You do the vegan and with the mandarin oranges, you're pretty close. Again, with the pink grapefruit, it bumps you over. And if you're just using the white grapefruit, it drops you lower than the other two. Black bean salsa with the mandarin oranges bumps you tiny bit over 300. Half a pink grapefruit gets you pretty close. And then the white grapefruit, a little bit lower than the other two. Now for your beverages and snack options. Beer, wine, most of your spirits are very low to no oxalate. One of the exceptions that we do know about is Hefeweizen, and since that's more of a wheat beer and a little thicker, it's closer to a microbrew. We don't really know too much about the oxalate levels of the microbrews in beer because we haven't tested a lot of them. So, if you're a beer drinker, stick with the well-known stuff. Guinness, Coors, Budweiser, that kind of. Coffee is very low to low oxalate. Many of your herbal teas are very low. Some green and black teas are fairly low oxalate. Sodas are pretty much no oxalate. And juices are also very low to low. Same with electrolyte drinks, and of course, water. And it pays to remember, this is when you're talking about, if you're right at that 300 level or close to it, you're probably going to want to stick with low to no oxalate. If you're 10 to 12 points off that 300 per meal, then you might want to throw in something a little bit higher to help you hit that level. With the snacks, the best thing is always check the serving sizes. So if you're only needing very low to low fruits, look at grapes. Those are, other than the Concord, the red and green grapes are very low. A lot of your melons, watermelon, honeydew, cantaloupe, those are all very low to low depending on your serving size. Bartlett pears, Gala and Fuji apples are, again, low, very workable. If you need to do more medium to high oxalate, you've got mangoes, you've got cherries, grapefruit, strawberries, even a little bit of kiwi. Again, check serving sizes. And if you want to go a little bit higher, your anjou pears, clementine, or oranges, your Magnus pears, those are all a little higher oxalate, but again, that's when you're starting out and you want to get to that 1,000 milligrams a day, or maintain it at 1,000 milligrams for a while. You can use the higher oxalate ones before you start doing a serious reduction. Nuts and seed, you got the Baruga nuts, you've got pumpkin and sunflower seeds. Tiger nuts are all fairly low to medium. Pistachios, walnuts, pecans are more higher medium to high oxalate, very high oxalate. But again, if you've got 100-ish milligrams to play with, especially the walnuts and pecans are very doable. You've got some nutseed butters, macadamia, pumpkin, sunflower seed are all low to medium, depending on the amount that you use. And of course, can't forget chocolate. And I think that's it.
Fabulous, Karla. Thanks. I just want to add a couple of things, for everybody to remember, is for those of us that do not live in the US, because there was a question about serving sizes. When Karla is talking about a cup, she's talking about an actual measurement. She's talking about a measurement cup that you can buy on the internet. You can get on Amazon, you can get on all of those big websites that sell cooking stuffs, and you're going to find the measuring cups with the cups that are in the spreadsheets. It's not, because I already had some people saying, what cup? And then they come with like a teacup, and then they come with an espresso cup, and then they come with a mug. Which is a cup? And it's like, no, it's none of those. A cup is a specific measurement.
Yeah, and that's
half a cup and the quarter cup and the eighth of a cup and the whatever. And the same for tablespoons and teaspoons. So when you're looking at the spreadsheet, that's what we're talking about. It's not, yeah.
And that's also why we would put in either a milliliter serving beside that, or a gram weight serving beside that, because the cups that are being used for measurements are volume cups. So an 8-ounce cup in North America is like about 120 milliliters. And so we do try to have on the spreadsheet the conversions between one and the other, but we've settled on the spreadsheet with a half volume cup. So that's a 4-ounce volume measurement as a serving for most things like fruits or veggies or grains.
Well,
and we do also then have the gram weights for those things.
Yes. That was the one thing that I was going to add is a spreadsheet does give you both. So if you want to use, a half cup as your, as part of your calculations, it gives you that information. If you would prefer to use, a scale and go by grams or go by milliliters, it gives you that, because that's how they test it.
And keep in mind, one way is not better than the other. It's what works. So when I first started doing this, because my brain just was not as functional as I wanted it to be, I started out with eyeballing a half cup or a 4-ounce volume measure of my foods. And then I just went with that. I did not then, try and figure out if the weight was accurate or any of that. I just assumed that there would be some tolerance for oxalate going up and down, because my diet would have always done that. And I also assumed that as long as I was coming in reasonably close to where I wanted to be, it would all work out in the wash, as the expression goes. So, I do the same thing as Karla does. Like, I will sort out my oxalate numbers. They'll be pretty precise in a recipe that I develop. But even once I then determine that the serving size, say, is I'm going to pull a number out of a hat, 9.7 milligrams of oxalate. I'm going to treat that like 10 because there's no way that we have enough precision here to be able to say exactly. So every one of my recipes will say about blah, blah, blah oxalate. So I just want to add now a little bit to what Karla has said, because I was actually at my optometrist and I have pupils the size of dinner plates and you can't tell on Zoom, which is really good, but I didn't have enough time to put into a presentation. But I've got a food list that I did just to show what you can do with this plug and play idea. And so this food list is just going to show foods that are between 25 and 35 milligrams of oxalate that you could use to add on to some standard oxalate value main course, like what Karla was working through here. So let me just show my screen. Okay, so this is now just foods that I pulled out of the Trying Low Oxalates food list. And what I've actually got here are things that are all between 25 and 35 milligrams per the serving that I've specified here. So in some cases, I've used a slightly bigger serving. Like I've got huckleberries here for those of you who would be able to get access to them at 3/4 of a cup, because I'm trying to get between that 25 and 35 milligram range to get more to that plug and play kind of approach. So I've got mulberries, the pink grapefruit, 1 whole grapefruit. So that's a big serving. Because I also wanted to think through, what if somebody's got a larger appetite? We have to kind of keep in mind who we are reducing oxalate for. I've got kiwi in here, 2 fruits. So, but notice it's 150 grams. So again, a larger serving. I've got clementines. I've got navel orange, 1.5 fruits, and I've got Anjou pear, and I've actually got it at 1 1/4 here, just to try and see what's possible if we're thinking about trying to hit that 25 to 35 milligrams of oxalate. I've got a few grain options here. So a bagel, 1/2 cup of oat bran. Some people still really like that kind of thing in the morning for a breakfast. This could be an option there. 5 cups of popcorn. Why 5 cups? Because I don't know about you, but I can eat a lot of popcorn. So this is a way to kind of understand, well, if I'm going out with my sweetie for a movie tonight, maybe I can have some popcorn at the movie theater and I'll be okay, because we're still in the process of reducing. And for those of you who are thinking about the whole gluten-free thing, Siete is a very common brand in the world of cassava flour gluten-free options. And you could have 2 tortillas here for about 31 milligrams of oxalate. So then it's a matter of the right kinds of fillings. But if you were trying to hit in that 25 to 30 range, then maybe you just fill it with something that's really low in oxalate. If you're trying to hit 50 milligrams, maybe you're filling it with something a little different. So we still want you to think in terms of maybe blocks of oxalate and how you get there. I've got some veggies here. 3/4 of a cup of boiled green beans gets you about 30. A cup of steamed carrots gets you about 35. We've got curly kale, which is the stuff that most of us think that we can't eat anymore once we're on low oxalate. But as you're coming down, you may be swapping out one higher oxalate green for then the next level down for maybe curly kale. And then maybe you're moving to something like mustard greens or collards. And then maybe at the end, you're hitting, something like a lacinato kale. So stepping stones. Potato new with skin. These are the ones where, we're looking at a red skin potato, white flesh. It should say peeled and boiled. I'll have to put that in there. 3/4 a cup gives you about 25. And then I'm looking at averages among more than one pieces of data for that one. We've got the russet in there, peeled and boiled. I've got 3/4 cup at about 30 again, 29. And radicchio, which is not something that I eat a lot of at this point, unless I'm just adding a little tiny bit in a salad for fun. But you could make 3/4 of a cup and use that as a salad base and get 25 milligrams. So all of this stuff is coming from the Triangle Oxalate spreadsheet, although in some cases I've got averages as opposed to single data points here. But again, the idea is that if I'm working with a list like this, then if my morning snack happened to be mulberries, then maybe for my next add in, I'll go closer to 25 than over 30, right? Like you can bounce around a little bit within a category like this. But the whole idea is that if I pulled even randomly one from each one of these categories for a meal in order to get my oxalate at the right level, I'm going to come out pretty close, as long as I'm not always biasing towards the highest end of the range. Right? So you can kind of work with this like plug and play. And a similar approach could be taken if you were dropping down to say 500, which was the example I really wanted to work through, where your main dish might be more like even 50 milligrams of oxalate. And then perhaps you're picking items to go with it to total another 100. You've got 3 meals that are 150 a piece. You kind of know which things you're going to mix in order to get there. The list I just showed you would be the kind of list I would be using for sides, with a main course that would have about 50 milligrams in it. And that's probably going to be a main dish that maybe uses some spices that amp up the oxalate, or are using other vegetables which are going to amp up the oxalate a little bit in that main, and then pick 2 or 3 sides to go with it in order to get into your appropriate range. And that's really a much saner approach, because you can sit down, you can think about it, we can have some of these kinds of lists where we have higher oxalate options in a particular range so that you can work with that a little bit. And then instead of having to count everything, you can kind of say, okay, here's my plug and play for the next 2 weeks. Maybe it's even 3 weeks. And maybe we're coming down 50 milligrams a week. Certainly after you've hit 500, you should probably be coming down 50 milligrams a week. Maybe if you're starting at 1,000, maybe for the first few times you drop, you might be able to drop 100, but it just sort of simplifies things if we can start to think in kind of reasonable chunks where we can then plug and play with them.
Absolutely. So we're hoping that this has been really helpful. The idea of having like basics that you have always on hand, that you know what kind of level they are at, they become your options. And every time you add them onto your plate, you would start being able to be in control of your lowering oxalate adventure. Another thing, just to close, is that you have to remember that there's different ways of preparing any one food, and those can make it that something is more digestible or easier to digest than others. So if we just look at a regular example, it's easier to digest an applesauce than a raw apple. If you're having trouble with stomach acid or things like that, you might want to start with something that's already being cooked, and it's being cooked in a very gentle way. It's easier to digest something that's been boiled or just put on the grill than something that has been deep fried or being covered in spices and things like that. So just be smart about it, but have fun. Really have fun, look at the different possibilities, take advantage. And one of the things that helped me look outside the box, because we are animals of habit. And one of the things that happens is that you go to the supermarket and there's, a few fruits and a few veggies that always go in the caddy, and you don't see it everything else that's in there available. So one of the things that helped us, some of the things that helped us would be, to have like a target recipe once a week, to try something new. So we started with the international cuisine type of thing. So we started having, noodles with scampis and this and that and different types of mushrooms and all sorts of different things that you just have to try once. And if you try it with a recipe and already what your level is and where can you go, that would be great. The other thing is that it gives you control. If you know you're going to your mother-in-law's for dinner and you're asking her, hi, what's for dinner? And she says, oh, we're having spinach salad with this and that and that and that. You can already say, okay, so that meal, it's probably going to come in at, let's say in that example, 400 milligrams. Okay, so what do? Guess what? You stick to 50 at breakfast and 50 at lunch, and then you can participate at night. So just be smart about it and be healthy, be well. And if there's any questions and comments, just give them.
We have them coming in.
There's some questions.
I was just waiting for you so that I could get us answering some of them. So somebody was asking about why do we step down in dumping, and the big thing there in terms of coming down slowly is so that oxalate that may have accumulated in your tissues is not going to hit your bloodstream all at once, where you get this big push of oxalate out into the bloodstream, because then you can also get very intense symptoms. And so what we're trying to help you do is get all the benefits of the diet with as little of the downside as possible. And do keep in mind, oxalate dumping is going to happen. That's it, because it's going to move out of your tissues if you're reducing the amount that you're taking in. So it's not that oxalate dumping is bad. It's that we want to moderate it so it is as minimally stressful as possible, because oxalate's toxic on the way out as it was on the way in. We may not have noticed it on the way in because we were younger, we were healthier, we were in a different place in our life. But as it's coming out, we are often older, have other kinds of health issues, may not be in the same position we were when it went in. And so what we
have the same microbiome.
We want to make sure you're not suffering intensely as it's leaving. We can't guarantee that, but if you come down slowly, that's your best bet. We also have a question about rotation diet. There are lots of ways to do rotation diets. Some of them have you avoiding foods in a particular group and only repeating those every so often. But I think what we were talking about today in terms of rotation diet was just try to exploit the variety in your diet. Try not to be eating the same thing all the time. And this is not that carnivore diets or other specialist diets aren't going to be helpful for some people. This is really about ensuring that you're not accidentally creating a nutrient deficiency just because you're avoiding certain types of foods in general, and therefore completely missing a nutrient that you really need. So if you rotate, you avoid hitting that kind of a problem, and like you cover your nutrient bases better. Because even if you're talking about meats, like Patricia was talking about earlier, chicken, pork, beef, fish, seafood, they all have different nutrient profiles, and they'll even have different nutrient profiles within varieties of those animals. So let's just be smart and kind of exploit as far as possible and make sure we're covering our bases. We did have somebody ask about how to get food suggested for oxalate testing. the trying low oxalates testing group, TLO-testing. I run that. And if you're a member of the Trying Low Oxalates main group, you can join TLO-testing. And in November, we're going to be running another batch. And people who really want to send a food in and sponsor the cost of the test are absolutely encouraged to do that. The more testing we do, the more numbers we have. Why do some foods that are the same have such varying oxalate levels? Ooh, we could do a whole session on that one. Sometimes different varieties of the same food will have a different oxalate profile. So the kale version that I was just talking about is a great example, where curly kale is very high oxalate, like much higher oxalate than something like a lacinato kale or a purple kale. And they're all kale, right? So unlike something like gluten, where if I'm avoiding gluten, I know that that means grains, and I'm looking for grains on labels or grain fractions on labels. Oxalate is an entirely different ballgame. This could be different for like every plant that you look at. And in fact, even growing conditions can make a difference. So I recently saw research which said that drought can increase the amount of oxalate that's in a food. So honestly, we are just at the beginning of what we need to know about when it comes to measuring oxalate in our food, which is why I talk about biasing in a certain direction as opposed to being too focused absolutely on numbers. And I guess the other thing I'd say is we really need to get to the place where we are with calories, because a great example is something like tomatoes. Every tomato you eat is going to have a different calorie count. And it's just that we've done enough testing of tomatoes in general that we can say with great assurance, this is the average calorie for, a measurement of tomatoes. We have not done anywhere near that level of testing for oxalate. So there's no way for us to say this is the average. And it can also be very surprising when we do testing to see outliers, so that you've got sometimes a really big spread between your numbers. So right now, that's wwhy we say bias as opposed to, gee, get out that calculator and do it all precisely, because we don't have that level of data.
And growing conditions vary so much, and also the microbiome that is in the ground, because that's what actually makes calcium go up in the plant. And calcium is stored in oxalate crystals within a plant. So there's a ton of factors, from pH for the type of biodiversity that is on the ground, the growing conditions, the nutrient conditions that are going to affect
the variety and genetics in ways that we probably don't know yet. I've got a question here. I buy mixes of fresh foods at the grocery store, but can't figure out the ox levels. Yep. So I'm sorry. One of the things we're talking about here is like the challenge is to kind of simplify in order to know better what you're getting. And as soon as you've got a mix of things, you might be able to guess, right? Like if I go to the store and I get like a coleslaw mix, and it's mostly green and red cabbage, but there's a little bit of orange in there because they threw in a little bit of raw carrot, I can assume it's probably, low to low on the medium scale, and I'm not going to stress about it too much. But if I see a lettuce mix that's got kale, spinach, blah, 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 and then arugula, and then red lettuces, like it's all over the place, I'm going to avoid that, because I just am not going to be able to do the same kind of a guess on oxalate levels. And while precision is not required, at the same time, I only take risks where the risks are worthwhile. So, it is better when you're lowering to go for those single ingredient side dishes, or like one whole food as a side dish, because then you have a much better chance at having a reasonable understanding of the oxalate.
Yeah,
Okay.
understanding is the key, really, because you could be getting the fajita veggies, like in your example, and you feel terrible the next day. Did you feel terrible because of the black pepper that you put on the fajitas? Or are you feeling terrible because of the spinach that was in the mix with the fajita veggies? Or are you getting sick because there was a bug in the salad that you didn't know about, and you actually have, a stomach bug? Or, I think the simpler it is, and the fact that you add an ingredient at a time, then you simply stay in control, and then you know where the problem might have possibly come from. And that level of control gives you a lot of peace.
It's a really good point. The more complex the food is, the less likely I know what threw me off. And that kind of feeds into the next question, which is, do oxalate issues go hand in hand with histamine issues? We're going to have to do a separate session on that, because honestly, it's a big topic. They do appear to be related. They're not exactly the same thing. And so I think that's a stay tuned for that, unless somebody else wants to dive in on oxalate versus histamine, but that's kind of a bigger question.
Yeah, I think that is a much bigger question, but I would say just have to remember that oxalate triggers inflammation. And when you're triggering inflammation, there's lots of things that are happening. And one of those things that happen with inflammation are histamine reactions.
Yeah, that's where inflammation is, where oxalate and the immune system overlap. And so, yeah, Susan's session from last week, if you're on the Triangle Oxalates group and you want to listen to that, I think she starts to talk a little bit about some of the places.
Yeah, a little bit, but just remember that there is a little piece of the cell in every cell in our body that's called inflammazone. And when oxalate gets elevated, the inflammazone gets unhappy and angry and active. And when the inflammazone is active, a lot of things are unhappy.
Yeah, so, and your immune system starts to pay attention. As soon as there's inflammation being set off, triggered in the body, then the immune system and the mast cells start to pay attention. And the more unhappy the mast cells are, the more likely they react. And so it's not necessarily that they're completely divorced from each other, for sure. Did you want to add anything, Karla? Because I know that you guys had to deal with histamine and salicylate too at some points, didn't you?
For us, it seemed to go hand in hand at times.
Right. Yeah.
There were a couple of times throughout the years where my son especially had histamine issues and salicylate issues at the same time that seemed to tie in with with oxalate, where dumping tended to make it a little bit more challenging, but not all the time. So I don't think there's any real hard and fast answer for that.
Yeah, so we can surely do some of the pragmatic, our personal experiences with these things. But yeah, it's not something for us to fit in, as it's now rounding the hour. So
exactly. So now at the top of the hour, now we're going to say goodbye. And Monique, what's the topic for next week?
Ooh, now I have to look it up. We do have Halloween coming up. We do have some other, things that are going to be arriving as we're rolling into holiday season for many of our various religious traditions, and also as the end of the year comes along. So I do think we have some really good topics that are coming up. And next week, the Monday is Canadian Thanksgiving. So to all my fellow Canadians, Thanksgiving's on the way. And so we'll have to take a look at some of the topics that we did have scheduled, because I think we were trying to get ready for Halloween in particular. So yeah, we'll have some good ones coming up.
Sounds great. Okay, everybody. Well, thank you very much. You will find a recording of this session in our YouTube channel, which is Wizard of Ox, low oxalate experts. And hopefully you will go and subscribe and hit on the little bell so that every time that we post something, you will be able to see it. We're working on some short videos that I think you're going to find very, very useful. We're going to be posting them also on the YouTube channel, but also on the Trying the Oxalates page. So be well, everybody. Have fun with this diet. Take the decision to, explore and dare and try new things. Get out of, and try that funny looking, veg. And just remember to go low and slow. So we'll see you next week and take care.